And I'm the pastor of University United Methodist Church. I'm so glad you're here. You may not know this, but John Wesley, who was the founder of Methodism, believed that there was no gospel other than the social gospel. So social issues are a big part of the United Methodist ethos, and we believe that as United Methodists that we want to welcome all faiths, all people, and welcome all viewpoints. So we're very glad you're here. We thank all the panelists for coming, and Moti for inviting us to hold us here. And I'd like to begin with prayer. Would you pray with me? Holy God, we come before you. We honor you for your wisdom, for your power, for the beauty of your creation. You have called us each and all to be peacemakers and justice seekers. We ask for your guidance. We ask for your holy presence. We ask that you give us all wisdom. We pray this while we honor and glorify you. Amen. I'm going to go upstairs and run PowerPoint. There are restrooms right down the hall. If you need to, just get up and go as you need to and come back down the hall. And the one right at the end of the hall is women's. The one slightly to the left is men's.
Welcome to the third of our City of Kansas Interfaith Actions 2018 Faith and Public Policy Forums. My name is Rabi Moti Rieber. I'm the Executive Director of Kansas Interfaith Action. Thank you for coming. These forums are intended to serve two purposes: to give good, solid, factual information about issues of pressing importance to the people of Kansas, and secondly, to put the issues that we face into a moral framework. For those unfamiliar with us, Kansas Interfaith Action is a statewide, faith-based issue advocacy organization that puts faith into action by educating, engaging, and advocating on behalf of people of faith and the public regarding critical social, economic, and environmental concerns. KIFA members are shaped by the values of our diverse faiths, which connect us to an age-old concern for justice, peace, and human dignity. Rooted in faith, we join hands across difference to work for moral public policy in Kansas. We are grateful to University United Methodist Church and to its pastor, Reverend Janine Stanford, for allowing us to hold the event here tonight. We're also grateful for financial support for this event from James Morlacher, our First Affirmative Financial Network in Lenexa, and also from the Climate and Energy Project. I'd also like to personally thank David Norman, who is my advanced man in Salina and has done such a great job getting the word out about this, as well as my Airbnb. The format of tonight's event is, after I finish talking, whenever that is, each of our panelists will present on their area of expertise. The framing question they were given is, what is most important for people to know about the work you do and the challenges you face? If you were able to tell an audience in Saline County voters the most important thing about the challenges facing Kansas, what would it be? After each of our presenters speaks for 10 or 12 minutes or so, we'll have a question period. Tonight's event is nonpartisan, meaning we will not be telling you who to vote for, or even which candidates we think are closest in alignment to the public policies that we are presenting here tonight. My hope is that you will, after you hear the presenters tonight, you will go to your candidates, and after the election, go to your elected officials and ask them where they stand on these important issues. There are also plenty of places to find endorsements, as I'm sure you're well aware. Women for Kansas, in particular, has a very comprehensive voting guide available on their website. And if you need help finding that or other resources, you can ask one of us after the event. We are calling this a Faith and Public Policy Forum. These good people are secular policy advocates and activists who are working every day to improve the lives of Kansans and to change people's lives for the better. It's up to me to put this into a faith frame, so here we go. How we as a society collect and spend our common resources, and whether and how we care for the less fortunate, are issues with profound moral significance. The reason KIFA exists, KIFA is Kansas Interfaith Action, is because in Kansas, the language of faith has long been used to promote extreme conservative policies that we do not believe are in keeping with the best teachings and intentions of our faith traditions. We felt and still feel the need to reclaim the language of faith for a politics that is celebratory of diversity, compassionate to those in need, and vigorous in its pursuit of justice. I don't have to tell you that we live in very challenging times. On the national level, it seems that every policy that is implemented, from tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations to rolling back key environmental and climate protections, seems to be going in the wrong direction. The focus of tonight's program is on the state level, but of course what happens on the federal level can't help but impact what we have here in Kansas. If Medicaid is changed to block grants, if work requirements are put onto SNAP nutrition assistance, if inhumane immigration enforcement breaks up families and disrupts our communities, that is something that we have to deal with locally, and those are pieces that we in Kansas have to pick up. The Brownback experiment wasn't simply a tax and budget experiment. It was an experiment with the entirety of state functioning. Medicaid privatization, massive cuts in the executive branch, which among other things have led to hundreds of children being forced to sleep on office floors, welfare reform under the so-called HOPE Act that has led to the virtual destruction of TANF in Kansas. Every element of this right-wing experimentation has proven a failure, and that's why it was rejected in 2016. Of course, now it's being tried on the federal level. And although we had a very important election 2 years ago that resulted in the partial rollback of the Brownback experiment, that progress was stymied in certain important areas, particularly Medicaid expansion. And we can tell by the governor's race that this year's election is being run on the premise that what was wrong with the Brownback experiment was that it didn't go far enough. Our topics tonight include a wide range of issues, far wider than we really have time for. Each of these topics could be a whole workshop by itself. And we're only giving them 12 minutes, not 15, 12. But KIFA is involved in each and every one of these areas: tax and budget, the state of anti-poverty programs, climate change and the environment, gun violence, voter engagement, criminal justice reform, and more. KIFA is in an interesting position in our work because we have to be concerned, as anyone else, with considerations of electability and feasibility if we hope to accomplish change. But on the other hand, as people of faith, we have a moral framework to which we must always stay oriented if we are to be not just effective, but prophetic in our work. And that's what we bring to this conversation. As people of faith, we believe in ultimates, and we must articulate them. The innate worth of the human being, regardless of the color of their skin, their national origin, or their economic circumstances. Everybody, simply by virtue of being a human being, has the right to what they need to succeed: clean food and water, health care, including mental health care, education, an affordable home, freedom from violence for them and their children, and a stable climate. If we start from that point, rather than from the fear of taxes, we'll be able to accomplish a good deal more. What we bring to this conversation is that these issues are not simply moves on a political chessboard, but that they are of vital moral importance, vital supernal importance, vital importance to God, to put it that way. And they are that because they affect the lives of actual human beings, our neighbors, our friends and family, our fellow Kansans, our fellow human beings. Whether we know them or not, whether we approve of them or not, whether we like them or not, whether we find them scary or unfamiliar or not, we are human beings, created in the image of God, and are worthy of love and respect of care of body, mind, and spirit. Because ultimately, what we do to or for the least of our brothers and sisters, we do to or for God. We have four really wonderful representatives tonight on our panel. I'm going to introduce them here now, and they're just going to come up in succession. And we won't introduce them any further afterwards, so you'll have to keep track. If you have a scorecard, you might want to. All right, so this is the order in which they will be speaking. Adrienne Olejnik joined Kansas Action for Children in September 2018. Before joining KAC, she worked in the gaming, finance, and library industries. She has been actively involved in local and state community work through service as a city council member, community foundation chair, leadership program graduate, and board positions. She is a 2005 graduate of Washburn University in Kansas, where she studied finance and management. Adrienne lives in Rossville with her husband and 2 daughters. Fred Iutzi is the president of the Land Institute, Salina, Kansas. He grew up on an Illinois farm and describes the fighting of soil erosion as a deep-rooted moral value instilled by his parents and grandparents. Since then, he has focused his career on the sustainability of agriculture in rural communities. Prior to his move to Kansas, he managed agriculture, energy, and cooperative development programs for the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs at Western Illinois University. His ties to the Land Institute are deep. He joined the Institute's Graduate Fellows Program in 2002, where he studied the possibility of growing small grains in mixtures with foraged legumes. Fred earned a bachelor's degree in geography and plant sciences at the University of Missouri-Columbia. We will not hold that against him. And a master's degree in sustainable agriculture and agronomy at Iowa State University. He has served in leadership roles in numerous environmental and agricultural organizations, including vice chair of the board of the Agricultural Watershed Institute and founding chair of the Illinois Biomass Working Group. Cori Sherman North has been an art curator in Kansas for 20 years and is the mother of 6. One of a handful of local residents who founded a new Salina chapter of Moms Demand Gun Sense in America in the summer of 2018. She's one of a handful of local residents who founded a new chapter, joining the state's roster of Kansas City, Lawrence, Topeka, Manhattan, and Wichita. And Ellen Glover joined the ACLU of Kansas as field director in June 2018 after almost 10 years of experience in community organizing for racial, economic, and social justice. Prior to coming to the ACLU of Kansas, Ellen was a senior organizer at One North Side of Chicago, where she was responsible for running statewide campaigns related to mental health justice and leading grassroots fundraising efforts of the organization. Through her years in organizing in Chicago, Ellen has worked on a variety of issues, including affordable housing, workers' rights, mental health justice, the school-prison pipeline, and electoral organizing. Our favorite parts of the work are relationship building, leadership development, training, and campaign planning. Ellen graduated magna cum laude from Loyola University in Chicago with a bachelor's in social work and a bachelor of arts in sociology. Ellen is particularly interested in building grassroots power among those who are most directly impacted by issues of civil rights and civil liberties. She resides in Kansas City and loves exploring the area with her partner Alex and their dog Hobbs. And without further ado, Adrienne Olejnik.
I think Rabbi Rieber did such a good job. I'm just going to cue up the Secretary of State debate, and we'll watch that for the next 12 minutes. Just saw that on Twitter. I really didn't know that was going on. So I am the Director of Government Relations for Kansas Action for Children. And for the last 40 years that KAC has been in existence, we've worked to achieve the vision that Kansas could be the best state to raise a kid and to be a kid. We were established by 3 junior leagues and the Kansas Children's Service League in response to the need for an independent organization that could speak on behalf of Kansas kids in the State House. We tackle 3 primary avenues of policy: health, education, and economic issues. And mainly we do our work through policy research, taking those issues to lawmakers, working across the aisle in both chambers, conducting outreach, and speaking across the state. We are nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we really believe that kids' issues are owned by no one and by no party, and they can be championed by all. So like I said, we work hard to work across the aisle in both chambers to make sure good things happen for kids. A little bit about how we're funded. A lot of people hear Kansas Action for Children, and I don't know why, but they think we're funded by state or federal dollars.
And we are not. We're fully funded by private philanthropy, and receiving those state or federal dollars allows us to move without constraint. A few things that I want to highlight from our past 40 years are 2 key endeavors. We have worked to protect the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is actually a federal program, but Kansas matches 17% of that on your state income tax return. And for years that has been at peril to be taken away. So KAC has worked very hard to make sure that program or key endeavor that KAC works on is to protect the Children's Initiatives Fund. And that is a pot of money that was created in the late 90s around the master tobacco settlement. States got to decide how they wanted to use this chunk of money that was going to come to their state for years to come. Kansas gets about $60 million a year, and showing great foresight, they decided to set that money aside and use it for early childhood programs. And so we've done that for many years. But as you can imagine, in tough budget times, that pot of money is quite attractive. And unfortunately, kids programs have been on the line several times, and KAC has worked to keep that CIF funding stable. So back to 2012, we've already heard a little bit about it, but to anchor us in the big picture, I want to remind you what happened that year. Governor Sam Brownback and his allies decided that we needed a new tax plan in Kansas. It was going to be an experiment. It was going to be like a shot of adrenaline into the heart of the Kansas economy. I'm sure you've all heard that phrasing. Doesn't sound very pleasurable to me to get a shot of adrenaline in the heart, but they thought it sounded good. In reality, though, the effect was much different. We were told there would be more people who'd want to move to our state, more people would stay here and open up businesses. They'd create more jobs in our state. There'd be more money in your pockets. But none of those things really came about. Instead, what we saw was a self-created, years-long crisis. 9 consecutive rounds of budget cuts, several credit downgrades, and record high debt. I think back to 2012 personally, and it was when my youngest daughter, Reese, was born. My oldest was heading into the public school system, and I was thinking, what is that going to be like when Reese gets there in a few years? And as we continue to see support decline for public education from the legislature, I knew I had to do something. Unfortunately, other Kansans decided to step up as well. They became increasingly aware and engaged. They came to forums. Thank you for being here tonight. You're still here. They came to forums, they formed state and local coalitions around critical issues that matter to them, and some even ran for office. So what we saw in 2016 was a wave of newly elected representatives and senators who were going to go to the State House and work to end the failed tax experiment. They were ready to fund our schools and restore the programs that had been cut for many years. On June 6, 2017, that new wave of moderates and even some conservatives and Democrats all joined together. A 2/3 majority overturned the governor's veto and ended the failed tax experiment. I feel like we need a lot of coffee. We waged years-long battles together to make sure that we could overturn the damage that had been done and move forward in a new direction. Our progress had been driven by grit and tenacity that was determined to out-hustle the massive money being spent backing the extremists who voted like they didn't care about kids, or families, or paved roads, or fixed-income seniors. Fill in the blank for many of the key programs that help Kansans. So the good news is the budget is starting to get better. We still had a $293 million highway transfer this year, and we had a little bit of money in the bank, but it's still not what is required by state law. So to get to the point of where we need to be, we have a long ways to go still. There are understaffed prisons, canceled highway projects, and an overwhelmed child welfare system, to just name a few examples. And for nearly 5 years, we've left hundreds of millions of our federal tax dollars on the table while denying access to health care for working Kansans. It's never made sense from state bottom line or the well-being of our neighbors, and in fact, we know that Kansas kids fare best when their parents are insured. This is a simple step we must take immediately. The bad news is that none of this can happen overnight. We know that. There is a lot of work to come still. Dwayne Gosman, who I hope you've had the pleasure of hearing speak, he went around the state in the past few years, a former state budget director. He said he feared it would take a generation to undo all the damage. So we're still a little worried. We see crowds shrinking. We see fewer people engaging in community events. We know the fixation and the fatigue of what's happening at the national level is having a trickle-down effect in Kansas. And we're worried that Kansans were so dialed into tax policy that once it passed and changed on June 6, 2017, they relaxed. The work was done, right? But that was just the beginning. We've had 2 years of positive direction and good things are happening, but it will require all of you, every Kansan, every year to stay aware and engaged of what is happening. So next year, if the trend continues, 36,000 babies will be born in Kansas. Let that sink in for a minute. I spoke to an early childhood education group this morning. I told them that was good news for their profession. Ready supply of customers. But thanks to decades of research, we know what we need to provide those babies so that their social, emotional, health, and educational needs are met. And they don't need just one thing. They need stable and responsive relationships, nurturing places and experiences, suitable nutrition, and access to health care. That will really set them up for a foundation of health and opportunity. There are great programs in Kansas that are already doing this. Parents and teachers and other home visiting services are providing key tools to help parents learn to be good parents. Child care assistance is enabling access to affordable, high-quality early care. CanCare and the Children's Health Insurance Program is helping kids go see the doctor. Cash assistance and the Earned Income Tax Credit that I already mentioned is adding financial stability to families. These policies and programs are just some of the ingredients in the recipe for a child's success. And they're funded by the legislature. And if they're not funded by state tax dollars, it's chosen in how we choose to use federal dollars that come to Kansas. So that's why this upcoming election is so important. You're obviously engaged, you're here, and I applaud you for that. And I ask that you'll go ask your candidates what their plan for kids and families is. It's really important that we know the next governor is going to take the responsibility seriously, that their first 4 years is going to be the first 4 years of life for those 36,000 babies that are born next year. So if we have a governor, an administration, and a legislature who understand and embrace these principles, the future looks bright, and not just for the babies, but for those kids in Kansas. We know that early childhood investments will pay dividends years into the future. But what happens if our next governor thinks we already spend too much on kids and families in Kansas? What happens if they want to dial back to the extreme tax policy that we've seen for the last 8 years? Think about the shrinking programs during that time and how that affected those kids. And that's what worries us at KUC. And that's why when I first joined in September, I learned we cleared our calendars for October. I thought, yes, no work in October. And then we filled them right back up, and we are traveling all across the state to speak to groups like yours to relay the importance of what's on the line for Kansas kids and families this year. It is so important to be informed, talk to your candidates, and then go talk to each other. Talk to your neighbors, get out the vote, and make sure that everyone understands what's at stake. So, go vote on November 6th. Tomorrow is the deadline to register if you or a friend is not registered, because we know our state can be the best place to raise a kid, but only if everybody's at the table helping make these decisions. So, I'm happy to answer questions when the time is right. Thank you.
Iutzi, once again, from the Land Institute. I can't help looking out at you, but notice you have an uneven population distribution here in the room. And if I remember my directions right, that makes most of you on the right wing. So I'm glad, center right, I will compromise, but I'm glad we have some turnout from each side. This is, I've had time to think about the rooms. This is actually my church here that I'm a member of. I've been here in Salina for 2 years, but my family have been Methodists for about 150 years, at least that we can document. So in a sense, I was part of this church before it was built. I think we have slides here now. Thank you, Janice. So I thought about just making the title of the word doom in giant letters up there. I decided I would leaven it a little bit. Doom, gloom, and gladness, a climate change update. Now, what the Land Institute works on, what we're best known for, at any rate, is perennializing agriculture, developing grain crops that are perennials that regrow from year to year without the need for replanting, that grow deep roots into the soil and can be grown in high biodiversity, and so that restore a lot of the missing ecosystem functions that our current agriculture has relative to the prairie. I'm not going to talk to you about that topic. I'm going to talk to you about climate change, partially because that's what Moti asked me to talk about, and partially because that's sort of the specter that our work and really all the work you're going to hear about today in its own way takes place in. Janice, you can go ahead and advance. So don't worry about reading any of the words here. That's what I'm here for, so you don't have to read the words. There's been an excellent set of writings published in the last few years by an economist named Kate Rayworth. Her book is Donut Economics, as is her website here. And so her concept here is that the middle of this circular diagram is a chart that shows how well the world is doing, or how well any particular country is doing at meeting basic human needs. So there's sort of a petal of that chart inside the green ring for access to energy, for access to nutrition, for ability to live in a democratic governance environment, for healthcare status, and so on and so forth. And so if a country is doing well in each of those things, that middle chart goes higher, it extends further out. Further out on the chart, the things that are ringing the outside are the various ways that human activities impinge on or extract from the earth. And so climate change is one of those sectors. Water use is another one. Nutrient cycling, phosphorus and nitrogen, things like that is another one, and so on and so forth. And the concept is that for what we're doing to really truly be considered successful and sustainable, we have to be doing well enough on that inner ring that we're not under some minimum, right? Where people need a certain level of amenities in their life to live, access to health care, access to energy. But we don't want to be over the boundaries in extracting from the earth. And so Kate Rayworth's observation is if you plot these two charts on top of each other, and you take the minimum zone, where if you were below there, people wouldn't be living a good life, and you take the maximum, where if you're above there, you're extracting too much from the earth in the long term, you get a donut-shaped space. And so we need to carry out our activities in the donut. And so the one particular dimension of that is climate change that I'll focus on. Janice. So this is where we're headed on climate change here. This is a chart that's showing on the vertical axis the amount of well, let's see. Over on the right, it's the temperature increase, and that's really what to focus on. On the bottom, it's years. Right now, at the end of the solid black line, that's the current year, or it may actually be 2017. And then those colored bands are the trajectories that we're on for different amounts of temperature rise. That gray zone over there is one where by the end of the century, which is the edge of the chart there, that globally their temperature rises about in the 4 to 5 degrees Celsius range. The blue zone is about 2.5 to 4 degrees of temperature rise, and then the yellow and the green are 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. That's relative to what temperatures were on the globe before the Industrial Revolution. This is sort of the currency here of estimating what effect climate change is going to have on people. The effects of climate change, which is partially global warming, and it's partially what Amory Lovins memorably called global weirding of weather regimes being destabilized and it being too warm or too cold or too dry or too wet in any given place in a manner that interferes with human activities. And this impinges on agriculture, it impinges on the security of people's homes and businesses when it comes to things like flooding and extreme weather events. It impinges on biodiversity. Species will live or die depending on the habitat impacts here. And what temperature we land at determines the level of disruption that we're going to get. Right now, if we don't change what we're doing, we're headed more for that gray zone. If the countries of the world that participated in the Paris Climate Agreement 2 years ago actually carry out what they pledged to do, which is a pretty dubious proposition at this point, will be in the blue zone. And in order to get down to that green zone, we've got to do even better than was pledged at that Paris Accord. Janice. This is a map here of how well countries around the world are doing on this. Green is countries that are doing well. There's not much green on that map. As it grades down into red and sort of a dark red or brown color there, those countries that are significantly undershooting the carbon dioxide emissions cuts that they need. And go on another slide. And this is the report card for the United States, and you can click again. And so the score there is critically insufficient on what we're doing. The pathway the United States is on now is one where if other countries did the same, we would be headed for this 4 degrees temperature rise or greater change here. And it's useful to pause and reflect on what this means exactly, because of course we think about biodiversity, we think about agriculture, we think about floods, and in some situations those seem rather distant from some of the immediate social concerns that we have that are 100% legitimate, related to equity, related to justice, related to safety. But ultimately, all these things wrap up in one another. When it becomes difficult to maintain a functioning economy, when it becomes difficult to maintain steady food prices, when it becomes difficult to live in a house that doesn't flood out every few years in a low-lying area, it's people of the lowest income status that suffer the first and the most. It's people of the most disadvantaged social status, whether it's reasons of race, gender, or otherwise, that suffer the most. And globally, it's the most vulnerable people in the global south that suffer the first and the most. So there really are no environmental problems, ultimately, that are not linked to short-term social problems. We'll click again here. I wanted to put a gesture towards saying something about policy, because that's what we're talking about. One of the realities of the situation here is that there's very little policy that we're pursuing right now in the U.S. To ward off climate change. A couple of the big planks in recent years have been the Clean Power Plan, which would do kind of what it says, would reduce carbon dioxide emissions from power generation some. The Climate Action Plan, both of those things are basically shuttered at the moment. And we'll advance again here. And so what pretty much anybody who's published on climate change anytime recently has pointed out, and this includes some of you may have been conscious of some press over a new climate report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that came out in the last week or so. They point out that not only do we need to have steep reductions in emissions to ward off, to eventually stabilize the climate, but we're past the point where we can reasonably expect not to have a lot of warming. So in this chart here, you see a black line that goes steeply up, and then a dotted black line that goes down. The solid black line is emissions. The dotted line is a scenario where if we drove our emissions down steeply. The red line is temperatures, global temperature, and that line keeps going up for a fair amount of time after we start driving emissions down. That's the latency or the lag that's built into global systems, and so it kind of further reinforces the urgency of this. Janice, so here, so what concretely do we need to do to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions in the U.S.? So this pie chart here is partitions out where in the economy emissions come from. Some of them come from agriculture, about 9%. That's that palest sector up there. What we're working on at the Land Institute actually will help in a pretty dramatic way there, but on that 9%, we can soak up some extra carbon too that's emitted elsewhere, but not all that much. These other sectors here, the commercial and residential sectors, that other kind of pale area there, 11%, and then most of the carbon is being emitted from transportation, from the electrical generation sector, and then from industry, from manufacturing. And so, we can reason pretty logically about what we need to do in each of those realms. It's some combination of using less and innovating to the best of our abilities to produce with less emissions. So this is the EPA's chart here, and if you'll click again, Janice, here's my chart here. This is a pie chart. There's one sector in it. It says human economic activity, 100%, is where anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions come from. And the difficulty that we have is that we have not yet devised, nor do we have any expectation of devising, a way to completely decouple our economic activity from emissions, from carbon dioxide emissions. We can reduce that coupling, but we have no immediate prospects or theoretical prospects of removing it entirely. Click again, and let's skip past this, actually. Yep, and we'll wrap it up here. So basically, a country that was doing well on meeting human needs without overloading the planet here would be up in the upper left-hand corner of this chart. These are almost every country in the world. They're distributed between not meeting human needs very well, but staying within planetary boundaries down at the lower left, and meeting human needs well and exceeding planetary boundaries at the upper right. There are not many countries here that are exemplifying what we need to do. There's one outlier there, Vietnam, I think there might be a data error there. But if you go through these, we would need to pick strategies from Eritrea on nutrition, from Tajikistan on sanitation, from education from Sri Lanka, from employment status of people from Rwanda, of all places, to knit together a strategy that met basic human needs without excess. So here's the bad news, and the good news slide that we'll quickly go through. This will lighten the mood. Stopping climate change is hopeless. Is that what this slide says? Let's do it. This is a New York Times article from the last week. This is one of the best things that I've read in a number of years. You should check it out here. It points out that the changes that we know that we need to make involve dropping our emissions, and in some senses dropping part of our economic activity faster than we've ever done it before. Ultimately, it's going to take an end to economic growth, a process of degrowth. But as this article points out, so even as minimal of a pathway as there appears to be politically to do this in the short term, I'll close out by reading a few sentences from the article. Solving climate change is going to be harder and more improbable than winning World War II, achieving civil rights, defeating bacterial infection, and sending a man to the moon all together. So how do we engage in a possibly, but not probably, winnable struggle within a rigged system against great odds, the ultimate results of which we'll never see? A generational thing. Forget success. How do we even get out of bed in the morning? The reason is that there's good news. We're perfect for this job. If the human species specializes in one thing, it's taking on the impossible. We are constitutionally equipped to understand this situation. We are, after all, mortal, and so our very existence is a fight against inevitable demise. We are the only species that contemplates its existence and gets out of bed in the morning and does something about it. That's what got us into this mess in a lot of senses. It's the only thing that's going to get us out of this mess. And I'll truly close now by quoting myself from Prairie Festival. I can find it on the page for those of you who are there. We are going to have the skills that are needed with equanimity, to seize the next chance for policy change that we get. May not be for a few years. And to ride this through in a process that's going to be painful and is going to require a lot of change. Ultimately, will require a reversal of economic growth. But what I'm confident that we're equipped to do is to learn to take pleasure in more modest amounts of energy-intensive goods and services, and in an overflowing abundance of beautiful relationships with one another and with the ecosphere that we're part of. Which brings us back to the other speakers here. So, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. And I'm Cori, Sherman North, the art historian that's a little nervous without pictures, so I brought plenty. Starting off with, I feel is one of the most important to me. I'm here because of the brand new Salina chapter of Moms Demand Gun Sense in America. I just wanted to say, we just started this summer. Moms Demand Gun Sense as an organization has been going on since 2012, right after the Sandy Hook murders. But here we are in Salina, right after the Douglas High School, Parkland, Florida student went into his high school and shot 17 students. And immediately, these brave students that survived have gone out for change. And that's what we're all here for. We're going to go after the policy. We're going to go after our elected officials and demand that our laws change. We've got to do something about all this gun violence and just the sheer numbers of weapons in everyday hands. In Salina, Central High School the students there decided they wanted to get together and observe a time of 17 minutes of silence, and then change to the next slide. And some of you in the audience were there when this happened, the next month in March of this year. You can see we parents standing at the back by the house, and then a closer view of our Central High School students. And number 5, daughter, is going to that high school at this moment. And I heard that the student who organized this walkout of school with the full cooperation of the principal and the school, she was very worried. She told her mother that another gunman could come over. So we all had to worry about that day right there.
put in the orange just as kind of a spot to take away from the kids, just in case. So that's why we're here. And the next slide. Sorry, these kids are showing the way, and we need to follow suit. So what can we do? We parents here in Salina got together, and with some support from the Kansas chapter, the whole state chapter, and the national organization, we got going and started our own work here. So the next, and there we are, that's our Salina chapter. And what can we do? The next slide. First thing we did was get visible. Start saying we are a force here, us parents, us moms and dads in Salina. We're going to march in parades.
We are going to call our elected officials, our legislatures, about every day. We're going to write them emails. We're going to demand that when things like arming teachers comes up as a bill at the State House, that we're going to be very vocal and have a majority effect. And in that case, it worked for now. Because every day, 96 people are killed by guns, and that can't go on. The next slide shows a group of moms demanding gun sense laws, converging on the State House in Topeka. And because honestly, the Kansas chapter has been working for 3 years in general, and we have many city chapters, because Kansas is one of the worst states for sensible gun laws, and so we have a lot to do here. Next. So we ask ourselves, how many more? What can we do? The national organization, you want to do the next slide? Got started, as I said, in 2012 after the Sandy Hook shooting, and they started small. A few people said, let's do some social action, and they had a Facebook presence. And it just exponentially exploded for the people that followed and joined and said, what can we do? What can we do? So they came up with this nonpartisan group modeled after Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Nonpartisan, we just care about the laws that make a difference in people's health and safety. Right now, there are about 4 million supporters of Moms Demand Gun Sense in America. There's no membership fees, there's no signing up, you just do what you can and grab a free t-shirt and show up. Things haven't changed an awful lot since Sandy Hook. There's been more than, almost 19,000 mass shootings, which means more than 4 people affected at once, which means more than 10,000 people have been shot, wounded, or killed here in America. So the platform is exploding. The majority of people here, us, we want this to change. And here's a group of a more national organization, wearing orange in support of the kids. And what do we do? Next slide. We get together, dads, families, phone bank, we canvass for voter turnout, we encourage people to just buttonhole their legislators. You candidates, what are you going to do if you're in office? You candidates, you legislators that are there, make our gun laws better. The letter writing to editors, social forums, Facebook itself has an amazing amount of writers on it every day. Moms also have other programs they've worked on. If you could change. And maybe, again, this is our gun sense candidate. This is what we're looking for. A person who seeks an office and is committed to standing up for the common sense gun safety measures. Just as people did decades ago to get automobile safety, we now all wear seat belts. You know, why can't we all have background checks? Why can't we have some standards that need to be met for permits to carry in areas where you're not supposed to drive, areas that you're not supposed to carry guns? We need to do a lot yet on the campus carry, for instance, here in Kansas. And the next one, to help out with the candidate buttonholing, you can go online at the websites that are available to find out if your own candidate, if your own legislature is certified by Moms Demand Gun Sense organization, because we do that. So please look for that and encourage your elected official to follow suit. Okay. Because that is the only way we're going to change. Moms are out there doing all kinds of things to get the message out. And then the next. One of the programs is geared towards gun safety actually in the home. There's an amazing amount of guns in everybody's everyday lives that we don't even know about, and 4% of all gun deaths are children messing around with guns in the home. So Moms Demand Gun Sense has the Be Smart program that goes into schools, churches, with the help of local law enforcement, and to try to hand out gun locks and just have basic safety measures really enacted, and getting whole families involved. The next one, and whole families involved, getting out there. Next. One of the catchphrases, of course, is disarm hate, because hate crimes carry an awful lot of gun deaths with it. 60% of deaths, gun deaths, are homicides. And then the next. Showing moms from one end of this America to the other, and then asking the question, why is the U.S. the only high-income country that needs lockdown drills? The only. Why? And these are the stats that I started mentioning, because we have so many 96 deaths every single day. So far, on the bright side, in 2018, across the nation, Moms Demand Gun Sense has helped pass 25 new gun laws in 13 states, blocking 90% of the NRA's legislation efforts. Now, we are against the efforts of the NRA, but we support the Second Amendment, and we always want to make that clear. We want gun safety and sensible legislation to support that. Okay. All right, and then you can go on to the next one. And second leading cause of death in children, and we want to change that next. Okay, we could just kind of scroll through a couple of these, and we can talk about them later if you like. But suicides are 3 times more likely to happen with guns in the home. And the next one, I think this will be the one more. No, one more. Sorry. Okay, one more. Gun safety is my #1 issue. Tell your candidates. Okay, and then one last public announcement.
Registration deadline tomorrow, and then, okay, we can stop here. Moms Demand Gun Sense in America is sponsoring a free documentary showing at the Salina Art Center at Saturday, November 17th at 10, free to the public, Making It Killing, Guns, Greed, and the NRA, and let's put a stop to it.
Hello.
Hello.
Good. Let's try that one more time. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, great. So I'm in the part of the program where everyone's falling asleep, so I just want to make sure y'all are awake and breathing. Since we're in a church, usually we do a
All right now, make sure you're awake, but I won't force you to do that. So as Rabbi Moti said, my name is Ellen Glover. I'm the field director at the ACLU of Kansas, the American Civil Liberties Union. Many people know the ACLU as the folks that sue people a lot for violating the civil rights and liberties. And that is true. For many years, we have been primarily a group of lawyers that sue folks that are violating the Constitution. But in recent years, we've decided, rather than always playing the defense of fighting back against bad things that have happened, we should also begin to play the offense of helping to make good things happen and stop things before they happen. So that is sort of where my position came into play as we began to look more into not just doing the legal route, but thinking about policy and thinking about community organizing, where we bring together folks in the community, constituents, to talk to their elected officials and ask for the things we want for our communities. So that is why I'm here tonight. Rabbi Moti asked me to speak about citizen participation in voting and criminal justice reform, which are two of our three primary areas of work here in Kansas. So just to talk a little bit about the priorities that we have in those areas. So for citizen participation in voting, we see two big barriers to ending voter suppression here in Kansas. One being expanding early voting. So who here likes to early vote? Yeah, me too. I think I've only once voted on election day. But in many counties, in all 105 counties in the state of Kansas, there is no required length of time for early voting. And so some counties, they get 3 days before the election that people can come early vote. In some places, they get 4 weeks. In some places, they get 6 weeks. And for people that have limited mobility, limited access to transportation, that have more strict work schedules, if they don't have more flexibility about when to get out to vote, they're not able to vote. And that is a form of voter suppression. So that is one of our key issues when you're going out there deciding which candidates to vote for. I encourage you to ask them, where do you stand on expanding early voting and making it consistent across the state of Kansas? We really think ideally having 4 weeks of early voting available would really increase our voter turnout. And speaking of voter turnout, so in Kansas in 2016, it was a little election that a couple people maybe wanted to get out for. We had 70% of eligible Kansas voters were registered to vote, and only 59% came out. So I'm assuming because you're in this room, you likely were someone who turned out, but only 59% of eligible voters turned out in that election. So another way that we think we could really expand citizen participation in voting here in Kansas is by doing election day registration. So election day registration first began in 1973 in Maine and in 1974 in Minnesota. So the 15 states that have implemented election day registration have an average increase of 11% voter turnout. Minnesota has the highest voter turnout in the entire country, which is at 74%, which is pretty significant. 19% of those voters came onto the rolls because of election day registration. So people don't only just register on an election day and never show up again, but they're returning voters that are consistently able to get out and vote and make sure that their voice is heard. And not coincidentally, I would say the 19% that were registered with election day registration in Minnesota would make up that difference between our 59% turnout and their 74% turnout. It would take us from being the 34th in the nation for voter turnout to being the first, potentially. So again, when you go and talk to candidates to figure out where they stand on the issues that you care about, I really encourage you to ask them, do they support election day registration across the state of Kansas? So those are our two priorities around citizen participation and voting. The other area of work that I want to talk about a little bit tonight is our Smart Justice campaign. So this is about reforming the justice system here in Kansas, which we know has a lot of problems. I looked up the prison population right before getting here, and it actually hasn't changed from last week, so I double-checked. But it is 10,061 people are sitting in prison in Kansas tonight. The capacity for prisons in Kansas is 10,000. So we are over capacity in our prisons, and we know that we are over incarcerating people, especially people of color, at disproportionate amounts in this state. So we have a few solutions to that. We strongly support reducing sentencing for nonviolent drug possession. About 30% of our prison population head in because of a nonviolent drug possession. So we want to reduce the sentencing for that so that folks can be diverted away from prisons and rather, be brought into substance use treatment or other supports that they may need in the community, but not sat in a cell that we then pay tens of thousands of dollars to house people in an inhumane way. We also support improving reentry programs so that when you are released from prison or jail and you're sentencing, you have the community supports you need to be able to jump back into a productive life in the community. When you've been in isolation in a prison or in a jail for a significant amount of time, it can be really difficult to get back out and find transportation or get your job back or find a place to live. And so we really support increasing the supports that exist for folks coming out of the prison system. Another area that we really care about is reforming the civil asset forfeiture, which means if you are suspected of a crime, right now in Kansas, if you're suspected of committing a crime, the police can take your things that they think were involved in that. So if they think you were driving your car to get to a crime, if you were just suspected of this crime, they can take your car. If they think your house was involved in this crime, they can take your house. And unlike our justice system that is supposedly, right, you're thought of as innocent until proven guilty, the civil asset forfeiture rules in Kansas say that you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. And so people are losing huge amounts of their own capital, of their own wealth, of their own resources without even being proven guilty of a crime. And so this past session, we were able to have a small victory in that the police now have to document what they are taking. Because before they didn't have to, and what that money is used for. So there's a long way to go on that one. So I really encourage you to ask candidates where they stand around civil asset forfeiture. It's a fancy term for the police get to take your stuff if they suspect you're guilty of a crime. The last one that I really would encourage you to think about and contemplate when you're figuring out which candidates you want to vote for is this past year we also had a victory around Governor Collier signed an executive order banning the box, which is removing the felony question from job applications. This was an executive order, which means the next governor can choose to keep it in place or repeal it immediately. There's no legislative pass that they would have to make to change that rule. So it has had a significant impact on folks who are looking for jobs and no longer have to say immediately, right? It doesn't block them from the door, whether or not they have a criminal history. But depending on who comes into the governor's seat, they could repeal that immediately. Their first day in office, they wouldn't have to pass anything in the legislature. So I really encourage you to think about that when you're choosing who to vote for or asking candidates where they stand on these measures. And we would love to pass that through the legislature so that it is a more permanent and secure victory for the long haul. So that is sort of a quick but broad summary of the work we're doing. So just to revisit, citizen participation in election, I encourage you to ask your elected officials about their stance on expanding early voting and election day registration. And then in the area of the justice system, I encourage you to ask them about their stances around reducing sentencing for nonviolent drug offenses, improving reentry services, keeping the ban the box executive order in place, and expanding it to legislation, and then reforming civil asset forfeiture laws. So, happy to take any questions when the time is right.
Just note that the reason that our top priority is not birth certificate registration is because the ACLU defeated that in court this past summer. So the reason that's a huge victory in the court system. So that's the reason that's not the top priority in that issue. I want to also mention I'm contractually obligated to say the words Medicaid expansion. So Adrienne did talk about that somewhat, but I want to make sure that we point out that a big priority for Kansas Interfaith Action and for the other poverty organizations is Medicaid expansion, which is long, long overdue. So that's something that you can ask your legislator about as well. I would like to. Oh, where's the pad that was going around with the names? So did anybody miss this, or did this pad miss anybody? So let's make sure that we get David. I have your information. So let's make sure that everybody who can that we want to capture your information. Also, Kansas Interfaith Action does a huge amount of work on every one of these issues. We do a lot with almost no resources whatsoever. So I'm going to pass the basket. We basically work on fumes and the support of the people who believe in what we're doing. So if that includes you, I encourage you to give generously. If you want to crack out your checkbook, you can make a check out to KIFA, K-I-F-A. And it's tax deductible if that means anything anymore, which I'm not sure that it does. But I would really appreciate any support that you can give to the organization, because it's really, we're doing this out of love and prophetic energy, but it does take some resources to do this work. So I'm going to pass this around. And there's a quarter line over there. And I'm going to ask the lovely David Norland to come and run the mic arounds. David. I'm sorry. The lovely but hard of hearing David Norland is going to run the mic around. So if anyone has a question, we're happy to take questions about anything you heard tonight or anything that you would like to know about.
All people are thinking about it as election day registration. I'm imagining people who would be in charge of that, saying there's no way to check the sure addresses and so forth. How do you address that kind of concern?
Yeah, so what has been found is that election day registration is the most secure way to make sure that the person registering is voting, because they're right there in front of you. There's really no way to miss it. So yeah, people would, when you register to vote, you do provide your name and address, and it's the same thing you do on election day. So it's actually a very secure way to register.
My question is for Brett, actually. As not as vehicles, the same people who tell me they don't do climate change don't do the policy. We know that's not what it sounds like. Planning level, working with how that means for the agencies, like nationally looking at how that is going to affect things. But how does that factor into those numbers of transportation? Is that included, or is it a possibility that with the use of such transportation, that will be true?
Yeah, so did everybody get the question? Well, yes, so autonomous vehicles have the potential to save some transportation energy because they can be operated in a more fuel-efficient, more energy-efficient way under computer control. Conceivably there could be less vehicles in a world with autonomous vehicles. So I've not looked at a lot of numbers on that technology specifically. My feeling would be that would be a fairly incremental change, especially in the context of the size of the reductions that we ultimately need to make from transportation and other sectors. So I think as would be, and this would be my same answer, for asking about electric vehicles or asking about alternative fuel vehicles or fuel-efficient gas vehicles. Is ultimately we're going to need fewer vehicles. We're going to need to drive fewer miles per person per year. Certainly the vehicles jails that we operate ought to be as efficient as they conceivably can be, and provided that the life cycle emissions and energy costs of engineering these vehicles and manufacturing them, and the computer infrastructure to support them, provided that pencils out, they could be a modest part of the solution, right alongside many other modest parts stacked up on top of one another to add on to something. So.
Jason Beat, Salina Journal. My question is for Ellen Glover. So, Saline County officials are currently in the process of finding ways to reduce the number of inmates incarcerated by the county. We have been exporting inmates to other counties because we've reached the capacity of our jail. This is a project that they have been working on for quite some time, and it does appear that they're finally getting somewhere. My question is, has the ACLU been involved in that initiative, and if so, in what way? And if not, or even if you have, what would you suggest?
Yeah, so good question. So the priorities I talked about in my piece up there were mostly around state level issues, since those are the main elections happening right now. But at the county level, one of our key smart justice initiatives. We're actually doing a ton of organizing throughout all of Kansas and some key counties around the use of diversion. Diversion are programs that divert, right? Move people away from being put into jail or making a plea deal that pleads them as guilty, and diverts people into substance use treatment, mental health treatment, or just community supports that they need. So oftentimes these can be, through reduced sentencing, that would also help. But we're asking our county district attorneys and county attorneys, our prosecutors, who have a ton of decision-making power over whether people go to jail or not. And oftentimes those decisions are driven by the way you look or the type of crime you committed. And so we really push for our district attorneys and county attorneys, our local prosecutors, to be using diversion more.
It's widely varies throughout the counties in the state. Some of them do over 10%, some of them hardly do any at all.
Yeah, so the national average is 9%. In states comparable to Kansas, their average is 13%. Kansas's average, I think, right now is 4%.
I don't really have a question. Well, I have a lot of questions, but I just want to thank all of you because I have learned a great deal tonight. I never thought I knew it all, but especially tonight I found out a lot, and I want to thank you all for coming and giving this important information to all of us.
Did the basket get around? Did the sign-up sheet get around?
I appreciate that you are really kind and restricted, but I feel like voter suppression has a lot of faces, and I feel like we only got to talk about one. And I noticed something on the ACLU Facebook page about Dodge City having one polling site, and I was just curious if you're seeing that as a trend across the state.
So Ford County is a very special place, is what I've learned. Ford County has 4 polling sites. Dodge City is the big city town in Ford County, and they have 1 polling site for the entire town. I think it's around 14,000 voters vote at this 1 polling site. And though Dodge City is a primarily Latino community, it's one of the few communities in Kansas that is a majority-minority community. The polling site has always been in the white part of town, across from the country club. That is, a nice trip for people that don't live in that part of town. And so the reason why it's getting a lot of attention right now is, so we've been doing organizing there for a long time. I have some great community leaders, and we recently found out that because the usual polling place in Dodge City is under construction, they're moving the polling site to the south part of Dodge City, which is where a lot of the minorities live, but they're moving it on the other side of the train tracks, which happens to be 30 minutes from any public transportation, a 30-minute walk. and you have to cross the train tracks, right? So for people that get a 30-minute lunch break and try to sneak, get voting in real quick, if a train comes, you can lose your job, right? So we've been pushing the county clerk there to make some better decisions around where she places her polling sites. And yes, we've been exploring that from a couple different angles of bringing community members together. And they were already doing it on their own, but getting them out there to push for her to make those changes, as well as seeking if there is some litigation angles. So yeah, check out Dodge City.
Is the ACLU interested in making voting day a holiday so that people don't have to work on voting day?
I don't think we have an official stance on that, but personally, I think it's a great idea.
I think voting should cover most of that. I mean, some of those are open on Saturday. It kind of depends on how.
Yeah, right.
In Johnson County, you can vote for 2 weeks. It's pretty easy.
County struggles with early childhood education and there's access to child care providing. What's some of the resources that Salina County can plug into?
So there is a child care assistance program that is funded through mostly federal dollars. There are some state dollars that help match that. There is a certain amount of eligibility, and the problem is that there are a ton of people who are eligible and are not accessing that program because it's really difficult to access and there's only so much money to go around. So the good news about that is that there are new federal dollars. It's called CCDF funding that's coming down from the federal government, and our state is going to get a nice chunk of money. Can't remember the exact amount, but it's in the millions of dollars, and 70% of that money is required to be spent on child care assistance. So what we see a lot of times is that child care providers just can't meet the demands of the population, especially in metro areas in the state and rural areas. I mean, it's really kind of a two-pronged issue for many reasons. So it's also an aging workforce, so we need more young people to go into the business of actually providing child care, whether it's through a new child care center or in their homes. But increasing child care assistance can really help get more slots opened up, increasing the reimbursement rate for child care providers. Right now, if you do get child care assistance, they give 30 cents on the market rate per dollar, which that's really motivating to accept those slots, isn't it? So there are a lot of different ways. I know I kind of bounced around all of that. I've got tons of ideas on how we can increase access to child care.
This was mentioned by Bennett Magnuson from Appleseed, the foster care, when it relates to child welfare. The rate of foster care need in Salina County has increased almost 42% in the last 1 to 2 years. And the most direct statistical correlation to that is the reduction in time eligibility for temporary aid-to-needy families funds, which was reduced by the Kansas legislature from 5 years to 3 years, and they were talking about 2. So I would suggest one question to ask potential legislators is, do you support going back to the federal standard for that? Comment?
Well, I can't do this on the microphone, but you see TANF dollars, well, you see increase in the child welfare system go this way, and TANF dollars are coming this way. Just kind of that swooping motion. So we have noticed that as restrictions are applied to TANF dollars, that more children are entering the welfare system. You know, what do those monies do for families, the TANF dollars? They help provide stability, whether it is child care assistance, whether it's work programs, whether it's SNAP benefits, kind of come through that a little bit. There are some cross-programmatic issues there. Cash assistance is another big deal that helps families just make it through the month. So as that stability is being restricted for Kansas families, we're seeing more kids go into foster care, unfortunately.
I'm sorry to double dip, but I feel like well, you gave a really good overview of what's out there for children and families. it's hard to overstate the damage that was done to those child care programs, child-related programs in the Brownback years, and there is a governor's candidate who is aware of that and is concerned about it. And I'm not going to tell you who it is, but she's a girl. I guess I want people to know that one of the programs that's really important to Kansas that's been the most profoundly damaged in my youth is DCF. And if you have anything to add to that, you can feel free to do so.
Well, you shared, I have to maintain our nonprofit status, otherwise my organization might be happy with me. So there are, part of DCF, is how they choose to spend money that comes from the federal government. I mean, we could go into a lot of the weeds on that issue, but I think that is the biggest deal that we're seeing. So there's a lot of control in who leads DCF. And of course, a DCF director is appointed by the governor, so there's a trickle down there. So I do think we're starting to feel a little bit more positive about the direction that it could head, but there's a lot on line again, and this election, depending on where it could go next year. So, like I said, I could speak at specifics that time probably doesn't permit, but really how we choose to spend money, and then the foster care system, which we already mentioned, making sure we have adequate control and regulation, and kids aren't sleeping in offices, and all kinds of things that you've seen in the news.
I want to say something about TANF, is that there's something that it's important to know about what happened here, is that the federal government, that's a block grant program, so they give a certain amount of money to the state, but the state is not required to spend that money on the actual needy families. So by squashing the number of people who were eligible for TANF, they were able to use the money to plug the holes that sprung in the wall due to the Brownback tax experiment. So they took this kind of moral, sanctimonious high ground about, sort of personal responsibility, but it was really a dodge to try to get the money to cover up tax breaks for affluent people. And it's really, there's something that really bugs me about using sort of this holy language to do harm to people. It's really something that really gets me.
Go ahead.
I know we've been using some acronyms. So for those, TANF is temporary assistance for needy families. So it's what we would otherwise maybe know as welfare, just to kind of clarify what we're talking about. And TANF has pretty broad definitions of how you can spend that money, and that's what we've seen in the state is not using as much of the money as we could for really its intended purposes, but the state finding reasons to fund other programs that really aren't directly related to TANF's purposes. So that's another issue that I'm aware of.
I wanted to add one addition to Jason Dean's question about incarceration that relates directly. Another issue besides diversion is bail bonds and bond amounts which can further impoverish people and keep them from getting into jail. And that will keep a lot of folks out. There's one candidate who's espousing reform jail bonds. She also is female, and she's not the incumbent.
You guys are so sly.
Okay, so my second question is for Cori North. When you look at public opinion polling with regards to gun regulations, you'll see that the vast majority of even NRA members support things like expanded background checks. And if you poll individually by specific proposals, they'll get very large majorities. But if you ask just a general rule, do you support gun control? It's about 50-50 or a lot closer to that. That seems rather puzzling, especially considering when Democrats in Congress, following Sandy Hook, tried to propose even the most modest of proposals. It failed to pass the Congress. I have my analysis as to why those things are all true at the same time, but I'm interested in hearing yours.
Actually, yours are probably more interesting than mine. I
agree with everything you said. Most of majority percentages are in the 80% for every issue, background checks to bump stock, banning, that sort of thing, across the board. And I think there is a language problem because we as moms demand gun sense. Are cautioned not to use the word gun control. And it sounds terrible, and it should be semantics, but I don't know why when push comes to shove that we can't get these things passed when everybody wants them. I'm sorry.
Continuing that conversation, this past year, Chicago Sun-Times did a series called 31 Bullets. 31 based on the fact that they produce enough bullets for every man, woman, and child. They have 31 bullets in the United States every year. But what they did is they did 31 bullet points on dealing with guns while supporting the Second Amendment. And I was struck that they found it fairly effective in Illinois to help with legislation and to help with discussion. If you started with supporting the Second Amendment, let's talk some common sense issues. And I'm sure I thought that would play well in Kansas, but I haven't seen those points repeated here in Kansas, and I'm wondering why.
I don't know why. I agree with you that the visuals, if you can see one person, one 4-year-old with 31 bullets in their possession.
Well, it's not the visual, the bullet points I'm interested in. I mean, and some of them I don't, I mean, I'm not a gun owner, but one of them, for example, is if you buy a gun, it should come with a gun lock. Just as a starting point. Legislation against straw purchases. I mean, there's 31 points, but they all start with supporting the Second Amendment. And I find that when I try to talk common sense gun control with some of my other gun-owning friends, the second I start that conversation, they get this glassy-eyed look, and they tune me right out. But if I started with, by supporting the Second Amendment, let's look at some points. And I'm sure it worked very well in Illinois.
So Mom's Demand actually does start with, they support the Second Amendment. That's always the first thing they say. So the second thing was the things that we worked on last year were this domestic violence bill. If somebody was perpetrator of domestic violence, they were restricted from purchasing a gun for a certain amount of time. Of course, that's liable to the gun show loophole also, because it's part of the background check situation, and you can buy a gun online or at a gun show. So the closing the gun show loophole is a big part of that. And then the other one, which came up, I didn't get a hearing last year, was a red flag law, which is if somebody is determined, I'm not exactly sure what the process would be to do this, but if somebody is determined to be a danger to themselves or others based on something they're posting or something they're saying, that their weapons can be taken from them for a finite amount of time. And those two are the most, sort of, seem like the most, well, the DV one passed, actually. But the red flag one is something that we think will have some play in the legislature this next year.
Yeah, and I think we definitely, all of us should take a more proactive approach and get these messages out for all the bullet points.
All right, one more. Last one, Jared.
Regarding campus care and the ACLU, we had a speaker from KU, Kevin Roma, here in town, who indicated that by law, legislators or administrators at KU cannot talk to legislators about the concerns of the campus carry. If that's true, it would seem to be a First Amendment issue that I was wondering if the ACLU was taking up or considering or whatever.
I have not heard of this, but I am not our legal director, so.
So individual faculty members can go to the legislature sort of on their own time. They're not allowed to use the lobbyists of the university are prohibited from talking about it. The prohibited from using state funds to lobby the legislature on guns. And they're very averse to treading on that line because they're afraid they'll get punished in their budget. So they were actually encouraging legislators not to fight against campus carry because they were afraid that leadership would take it out on them in the budget. So there's a very kind of sort of tentative dance going on. But there have been, and there's also now a very strict social media policy, but there have been professors and also grad students who have come to the legislature. Every time we've had this conversation, there have been people involved. But the leadership cannot and doesn't. So I want to thank our participants. Please let's give them a round of applause. If you know anybody who's not registered, get them registered tomorrow, and then open voting, at least in Johnson County, starts later this week. So let's go out there and do good things.
If you didn't get a chance to put money in the basket, it's right here.
And on the sign-up sheet,